Hi folks, Deacon Ed McCormick here, and this is part 3 of my brief series on the gospel and politics. And today I want to turn to our present situation. In the last 2 videos, I have been talking about the relationship between our Christian faith and the gospel and the political and economic and social and cultural world. And I hope that you now understand that the gospel is not about going to heaven when you die. It's not about some private, personal, spiritual experience. It is the good news that into our violent, unjust, cruel, and brutal world is coming God's kingdom of justice and peace and love, and we are called to be part of that. And the key takeaway here is that the gospel, the good news, is good news for some people, but for others, it brings God's judgment. And in chapter 4 of Luke's gospel, we hear who it is good news for. Jesus tells us when he goes into the synagogue in Nazareth that the gospel is good news for the poor. It's good news because it brings liberty to captives. It brings sight to the blind. It means the oppressed will go free. It means there's going to be a year in which debts will be canceled. And then if you look at Matthew 25, chapter 25, Jesus says that the good news means that the hungry will be fed, the thirsty will receive a drink, that the stranger will be welcomed, that the sick will be cared for, the imprisoned will be visited. And so the gospel is good news for the imprisoned, the sick, the stranger, the hungry, the thirsty. And in our day, these 2 dimensions of the gospel, good news for certain people, judgment for others, comes to bear on our situation. It is good news because the coming of God's kingdom means that hearts are being changed. Hard hearts are becoming hearts of flesh, hearts of compassion and justice. And so that the coming of God's kingdom and the gospel means that people are being transformed and freed in order to feed the hungry and the thirsty, to welcome the stranger and clothe the naked and visit those in prison. At the same time, it means judgment against all of those who oppose God's reign of justice and peace and love. It means judgment upon every leader, every nation and system and government, institutions and persons who promote injustice and violence, war and hate. So today, in our world, we are called to stand up for all of those who are experiencing the brutality and injustice and cruelty of our world and in our current government. And it means standing up for immigrants, for those who are being kidnapped and arrested and deported by ICE. It means standing up for the poor and the hungry. And it also brings a prophetic light. It shines a prophetic light on political leaders who abuse their power for their own gain, who attack their enemies, their political enemies, who use the power of the government to attack their enemies. It brings God's judgment down on all political leaders who send out paramilitary forces to arrest illegal immigrants and put them in brutal, inhumane conditions and arrest American citizens. It brings God's judgment on a government that destroys all systems like USAID, that feeds hundreds and thousands of hungry people in the world and brings them life-saving medicines. It brings God's judgment down upon a government that seeks to destroy all institutions that support democracy and undermine democracy and free voting. It brings God's judgment down on those government officials that dismiss due process, that unjustly arrest people, that kill victims who are in boats in the Pacific and in the Caribbean rather than arresting them and trying them. So my friends, I hope you see clearly that to proclaim Christ means good news and judgment. It doesn't mean that we somehow don't speak about politics and economics, That is not Christianity. That's a private piety that has nothing to do with the gospel. Merry Christmas.